There are some common sense adjustments needed to get this Bills passing offense back into rhythm. I'm going to break that down for you today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Locked On Bills is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you're going to get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Well, folks, welcome in. It's time for Herd Mentality, the weekly episode where you control our discussion. And we have some good things to get into today, including some thoughts on the Bills' player leadership and if there's enough hype and alpha type personalities on the team. We're going to talk about Tre'Davious White and some ideas for his future. We're going to talk about injury blame, but we start with the passing offense and a question from Sean. And I want to take this opportunity to really dive into my thoughts on some common sense adjustments that the Bills can make to get the passing offense on track. So here's what Sean says. I know the passing game has not been good enough for our standards, but Allen has a career high in completion percentage and yards per attempt. The issues seem more situational and got to have it moments and obvious passing downs. What is your perspective on this, and why do you think the numbers are not matching the production or impact? It's a good question, and I think it's important to acknowledge that it's not all bad. There's a lot of good things happening with the Buffalo Bills and the passing offense. But ultimately, you look back on really the last 4 games, and in 3 of them, I thought the passing offense looked unsettled and it lacked rhythm, and it just ultimately felt harder for the Bills to get it going than it should be. And I recognize that during this stretch, you've dealt with injuries from 2 of your best players that are part of the weapons for Josh Allen and Josh Palmer and Dalton Kincaid. Palmer hasn't played since the Falcons game, and it looked like he was getting it going. And he's one of the best separators this team has, and that's what's really missing. And that's been a big loss. And it's put some other players in the lineup that just aren't nearly as effective. Dalton Kincaid is obviously the best player that the Bills have in the passing game. And he missed, half of the game, probably more than half of the game against Miami with the hamstring. He's probably going to miss some more time here. Played with an oblique injury, missed some time with the oblique injury. Those are meaningful pieces of your offense that you don't have. And so I recognize that, while also acknowledging that, Josh Allen has been able to find some good production. But I don't think the numbers tell the story here. I just don't. And I've even had some good questions, in different conversations I've had through our subtext community or even in our Discord, where people are saying, are we overreacting to one game? The Bills just beat the Chiefs. They were the darlings of the league, and then they lose to the Dolphins, and, it's like everything's undone. I think the reality is that this overall season has been hard to gauge this football team. Look at the Ravens game. For 3 quarters, they looked rough, and then it all comes together in the 4th quarter, and then they continue to win some games, but through that, you felt like there were some issues, and then they drop a couple of games to the Falcons and Patriots, and the offense gets sloppy. The puts the team behind the sticks. They have some turnover issues. They have some vulnerability on defense, and you're like, well, maybe some of the concerns that the Bills were winning through are bigger deals, and whatever, you're 4-2, and then you come out of the bye and you smoke the Panthers, and you're just not sure. Like, the passing offense didn't look good there, and they took advantage of a backup quarterback and smoked them, and then they beat the Chiefs, and you're like, oh, okay, well, maybe the Bills are finally putting it all together. They're going to play great football and do this thing. And then the Dolphins game happens, and you're like, oh, yeah, the passing game's unsettled, and, the run defense is vulnerable, and the offense is making mistakes. It's been hard to really gauge this team. I think on one hand, you could probably get excited if you want to about, well, they really haven't put it all together. They're still 6-3. There's a lot of season left, and this could all happen. I think you could talk yourself into that. I think you should be able to if you want to. The Bills have had vulnerable seasons and put it together and went on a nice run. But I think that's part of the concern is we're not looking for more of that. We're looking to get over the hump. You're not looking for, well, yeah, they do the lull every year. They make you question it every year. And then we know how that ends. It ends in that moment against that team, and you just can't put it together. I think we were looking for consistency, dominance to an extent, a real run at the number 1 seed, and going on a playoff run that gets this team over the hump. That's what everybody wants. And the more time that goes on that we don't get that, and the more issues that pop up that convince you that they could be issues from it ever happening, boy, you just start to get anxious about it. And I think that's where this conversation, this aura is around the Bills right now. And that's what's fueling a lot of these conversations. I talk to non-Bills fans and people that cover the NFL, and they're a lot higher on the Bills. They're like, yeah, I think you guys are probably overacting. It's probably going to be fine. And I don't think they're saying that just because they know my allegiance. I think legitimately a lot of people are like, yeah, it's regular season football. It only matters when it gets to the postseason. There's people that will say that to you. So, yeah, it's not all bad. I recognize some of the injuries, but there are some common sense things to me that I want to point to that I think can get this offense on track. And I also need to say this. This Bills offense is built for efficiency. It's built for efficiency. And when you do things that take away from efficiency, it makes it tough. And some of those things are turn downs. Josh Allen turning down open receivers and bailing clean pockets and searching for some bigger plays, some pocket management and protection stuff, turning over the football. And you have role-specific wide receivers. And quite frankly, one of the most important players in this role-specific receiver outlook that the Bills have is the Keon Coleman role. And he's just not cut out for what he's being asked to do right now. And that sets off the balance of what you have in the passing game. I think the Bills thought or wanted Keon Coleman to be the type of player that gives you an impact like a George Pickens or a Cortland Sutton. Unfortunately, he's not that. But what if he was? Right? That's where you'd get excited about what this offense can overall be. And fundamentally, what this offense wants to be is ahead of the curve in the NFL. It is very much what everybody is celebrating right now from what the Rams are doing and what Seattle's doing. Everybody loves their style of play and the heavy personnel and how they're creating mismatches and dictating terms. Like the Bills are right there trying to do that stuff. The problem is the Keon Coleman role, that X receiver, isn't doing what it's supposed to do. And I do think it's unfair to Keon Coleman because, quite honestly, he's been asked to do something that right now is just not in the cards for him. And it's hurting this Bills offense, and it's hurting Josh Allen's performance. And it's changing the way that defenses are playing the Bills and putting a lot more attention on Josh Allen in the pocket. So, yeah, these things that take away from efficiency, not to mention you're turning over the ball more. You're having some penalties that are putting you behind the sticks, and it's hard to be efficient when you have things that take away from efficiency. So outside of like execution stuff, I do think there are some common sense things that the Bills need to be doing for their passing game right now to get it going. And first of all, I would say Dalton Kincaid and Josh Palmer have to get healthy. Hopefully Josh Palmer can go this week. And for Dalton Kincaid, look, he's got a hamstring injury. I'm guessing we don't see him until after this stretch of Tampa on Sunday into Houston on Thursday night. And you'd love to have him for both games, right? You'd love to have him for both games. But I don't think the Bills are going to have him for either. And so hopefully you can get him back and get him going, right? That's an important piece of this. Number two is you got to have less Keon Coleman and less Tyrell Shavers. These are not players that have shown the consistency to get open. And it's hurting your offense. It's reducing the menu for Josh Allen. It's leading to bad targets for those players. And on the flip side of that, if there's less opportunity for them, that means there needs to be more opportunity for someone else. And I look at Curtis Samuel And I look at Elijah Moore. These are afterthoughts for the Bills. These are not even secondary options for this passing offense. They're barely ancillary options. And those are guys with speed, with separation ability that severely trumps what you get from Coleman or Shavers. They need more opportunity. These are players that have been productive in the NFL. And the Bills can't even get them going with any level of consistency. Either one of them. Meanwhile, Coleman and Shavers play a ton. And then I think you've got to give Gabe Davis an opportunity. You know I'm not the biggest Gabe Davis guy. But that's where this is at. I'm not going to ignore that he's had meaningful production at times with Josh Allen. I'm not going to ignore that he's had good games with Josh Allen in the postseason. One of the most prolific postseason receivers the Bills have ever had. So, yeah, try that out because you know what? It's not a high bar to clear to be better than what Keon Coleman or Tyrell Shavers is offering right now. So you got to get away from that stuff and into some things that might be better. But ultimately, yeah, I think it's fair to say, like, there's probably a lot of overreaction that's happening. And I'm certainly guilty of it too. And I try to preach, like, don't ride the roller coaster. But this team's been very confusing for me this year in ways that it's typically not. And the confidence that I have in the outlook is not as good as it's been in past years, quite frankly. And that fuels a lot of my demeanor and my analysis, my thoughts, and what I say about this team. So go prove it to us. It's all right there. You can still go do all the things we want to see happen. But at some point, we want to see the Bills play consistently high-level football. And through 9 games, we just haven't seen it. And even through some of their inconsistencies, they've been able to pull out some wins. And maybe that's your silver lining, and that's where you find your excitement. All right, I spent way more time on that than I anticipated. So we got a lot more to do the rest of the way, including a question next on Mecole Hardman and how he can factor into this mix. We'll do that here next. Folks, be sure to stick with me. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. As the days get shorter and the nights come earlier, it can start to feel a little heavier, especially when life is already packed with work, family, and everything else. This season, it's so important to reach out and check in with friends, family, or even yourself. Just like checking on a teammate or reconnecting with someone you haven't seen in a while can lift your spirits, reaching out for therapy can help make a real difference too. BetterHelp makes that first step easier by connecting you with a licensed therapist online from wherever you are. Therapy isn't just for when things are falling apart. It's about staying balanced and growing through the tough seasons. BetterHelp matches you with a therapist who fits your needs, and you can switch anytime if it's not the right match. Over 5 million people have used BetterHelp, and with over 30,000 therapists available, finding support is really just a few clicks away. This month, don't wait to reach out. Whether you're checking in on a friend or reaching out to a therapist yourself, BetterHelp makes it simple to take that first step. Listeners get 10% off their first month at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon, because taking that step toward support might just leave you wondering, why didn't I do this sooner? All right, folks, welcome back. Let's get to this question about Mecole Hardman. Rooks from our Discord channel says, if Mecole Hardman is a fit and it works his way onto this roster, who is more in jeopardy of losing a roster spot to him, a receiver or Brandon Codrington? Can we expect the use of Hardman with route sweeps and the return game at all? So it's a good question. I think the player that needs to be nervous about the roster spot is Brandon Codrington. The Bills are rostering a kick return specialist that is a healthy scratch every week. That's it's a good living if you could find one, but geez, that's pretty useless for an NFL roster. And ultimately, the Bills' return game has not been very prolific. The Bills so far this year are 18th in kick return average. They're 31st in punt return average in terms of yards. And so you're probably looking for different ways to spark your teams. You look at the return game as a possibility to do that. And Mecole Hardman has a history of productive returns for his career, 96 punt returns, an average of 9.4 yards and a touchdown. He also has 46 fair catches. So he's fielded a lot of punts in the NFL. He's done so in the postseason. He's played a lot for Kansas City. It's pretty much where he spent his entire career. And he's had some receiving production as well. He's had over 500 receiving yards in 3 different seasons, 2019, 2020, and 2021. He's got some speed to him, obviously not much in the way of size. But I think his biggest opportunity to help this team will come as a returner. I don't have much confidence in how he can help this offense because you're still looking at players like Elijah Moore and Curtis Samuel who have been around, right? Curtis Samuel, his second season. Elijah Moore had a full offseason pretty much with the team, and they can't really make any consistent impact. And so I don't think that Hardman sign in the middle of the year is going to really carve out much of a role there. But in the return game, I think that presents an opportunity. And so the Bills with him on the practice squad can assess where that's at and make the adjustments as necessary. I think it's a worthwhile practice squad addition, but I'll admit that my expectations for what he's going to do is pretty low. And, I think you should be mindful of a player that, Kansas City had for a while, and they've since replaced him with very similar skill sets, like Xavier Worthy, like Tyquan Thornton, like Hollywood Brown, as a player that they drafted in the second round in 2019. And they even traded back for him after he went to the Jets. They've kept him around, but also have been pretty interested in not having him around based on, where he's at right now in his career. So yeah, I'm tempering my expectations, but as a practice squad, middle of the season addition that might be able to boost your return game with a guy that's had kick returns and punt returns in many seasons and many playoff games. Yeah, I think that's worthwhile at this point. Adam says, this may be a herd mentality question, but with all of the injuries the Bills keep facing this year and in the past few years, how much of that is bad luck, or is any of it on the training staff and coaches? I know injuries happen to every team, but it just seems like the Bills can't get through a single game without multiple injuries, and even can't get through a week of practice without multiple new injuries. Yeah, it's frustrating. I struggle a lot with this conversation, to be honest with you. I understand that we just generally have this desire to point fingers and assess blame. And if something isn't the way we want it, we especially want to figure out why and be mad at something. But I don't know how easy that is to sort out and be fair, right? I think it's important to want to be fair. Even if you're being critical of a football team, like, be fair with your criticism. I try to be. And so, the soft tissue, non-contact practice injuries bother me a ton. I mean, you're looking at Christian Benford, Ed Oliver, Daquan Jones, and Taron Johnson. They're all going to miss game time already this season because of either warm-up or practice injuries, and that's very concerning to me. The heat of battle stuff, I don't know. I mean, you're talking about football. It's a fast, physical, violent game played by big, huge human beings that smash into each other. And you got to have a little crazy in you to play football. The injury risk, as they say in football, is 100%. So I don't know, like, how do I possibly look at Ed Oliver sticking out his arm to make a tackle and popping his bicep as something that I can blame on anybody? How do I blame Landon Jackson and what happened to his knee on anybody? It's difficult for me. And the other part of this is you'll never be able to measure the avoided injuries. How many injuries didn't happen because the strength staff had exactly the right ideas to prevent them? It's a complicated conversation. I'm not comfortable assessing blame. It does feel like the Bills have been banged up. It feels like they've been banged up for years now. And I wish it wasn't true, but I wish there was a simple explanation as to figuring that out, because it's not uncommon. Like, look at the 49ers. They have injuries all the time every year too. Look at Baltimore. I don't know. It's complicated. Can we just admit that it's complicated? It's frustrating, but it's not an easy answer, and maybe might not be appropriate to say fire the strength staff all the time. I just don't know. I want to be fair, and it's a hard conversation. Chris says, with the Bills continuing their partnership with St. John Fisher, I'm curious what the benefits of this are, since the majority of NFL teams don't go away for camp. I know you've said that you are a fan of camp being held there. What are the pros and cons of going somewhere versus staying home, and how does it impact the Bills specifically? Well, I love it for the people in the Rochester area, having had a chance the last several years to spend a week in Rochester around the Bills and seeing the excitement for the community out there, and, the opportunity that they have to get the Bills out there, I think is awesome. I personally love going out there. I think it's a great venue, a great setup. for training camp, and it's very enjoyable for me every year. I think it helps bring the team together. You're talking about like 2 weeks, focus in just football for 2 weeks, get to know, not only your assignments and your roles and your coaches, but your teammates. And I think bringing a team together and the bonds that exist between the players and coaches, like that's very important in maximizing performance. So I like all that. The downside is that, I don't know, guys have to be away from their families for 2 weeks. And I know how difficult it is when I'm not home. It puts a lot of stress on my wife and, our support system. And so I certainly understand that, but that's probably it in terms of downside. I think everything else is pretty much a positive. And so I'm excited to see it continue, and I'm excited for the people in Rochester. All right, coming up next, a good question about Tre'Davious White's future. And then James Cook and smelling salts. We've got a question about sports psychologists and if the Bills lack alphas. We'll talk about that next. Folks, be sure to stick with me. When the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with SupplyHouse. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow with over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. Need parts fast for a project? Well, SupplyHouse has next-day delivery. Talk about a game changer. And the Part Finder tools and 3D schematics can save you hours on jobs when every detail matters. So join the free Trade Master program today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use our promo code SHNFL5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score the next basket to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. I love all the prop bets on football. I love to go in and, see how many receiving yards or passing yards they're projecting for the players and, go over or under on that. It just makes the sports watching experience even that more exciting. So check it out, folks. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, folks, welcome back. Got a few more to get to here today. The next one comes from Mac, who says when Maxwell Harrison takes over as the cornerback 2 full-time, should White become part of the dime package? It's an interesting question. It's definitely something I think the Bills should think about. I will say I think Cam Lewis has been pretty solid in that role, but I like this idea a whole lot more than the Trey White to safety conversations. There's a downhill run support box player element to playing safety that I just don't see for Tre'Davious White. But if you tell me the dime role and he's that 6th defensive back and you play him in zone or, situationally in man, I think that's not a bad idea in terms of how you can get some meaningful production out of him in a part-time role. So I think this is more interesting to me than any ideas I've heard about Tre'Davious White playing safety. Next one comes from Nick, who says, wanted to see if you had an opinion about James Cook and the smelling salts tell. It really seems like he sniffs a pouch every time he's going to get the ball. I was at the game Sunday, and there was one play in particular where James was yelling at the staff on the sideline while the rest of the offense was in the huddle, and it turned out he was waiting for the staff to throw him a pouch. As expected, the next play was a Cook run that was stuffed. Do you think there is something the coaching staff would or should address here? Well, I think if it's a tell, that's something that the Bills need to be mindful of, and it's certainly something that I think the league would be zeroed in on. There's all kinds of tells that exist out there, and teams are looking for them. And if that's true, then you got to be mindful of that. I will say that part of going to training camp practice, I get a chance to be on the sideline, which is just incredible. And I've seen a few times James Cook, when he comes off, comes onto the practice field, like for the start of practice, he's got hands full of smelling salts, and he gives them to the running backs coach, Kelly Skipper. And Coach Skipper's got him in his pockets, ready to give to James throughout the practice as he needs them. So James definitely enjoys the smelling salts. And look, I mean, in terms of him using them, that's a personal choice. He's inhaling ammonia gas. That's not for me. But it's not uncommon. A lot of players use smelling salts. A lot of them use them, pretty much before every play. And if James is comfortable with it, then that's on him. But if it's a tell, that is something that the Bills need to be mindful of. And it's something that I'll try to see if I can pay attention to as well moving forward. Alicia says, do we know if the Bills have a good sports psychologist on staff? You'd assume yes, but the degree to which they are such a different team week over week this year, even accounting for injuries, makes me think that there's some team psychology issues that might need tending here. Don't know if it's coaches or players or both, but it's hard not to see that as a potential reason why we have had such a whiplash year. Yes, the Bills do have a full-time sports psychologist, Dr. Dez. There's a lot of good information out there. You should Google Dr. Dez and read about her. And she's done a lot of interviews. There's a lot of articles out there about her and her role. If you go to her website, which in preparation of answering this question, I did, and I enjoyed it. You should go to it. It's Dr. Dez, DRDEZ.co. Go to that, and you can read a ton on Dr. Dez. But from Dr. Dez's about page, this is what it says. Dr. Festa. So her first name is Dez, and then her last name is Festa. So, but I think she goes by, most people refer to her as Dr. Dez. So Dr. Dez specializes in enhancing the mental resilience and performance of athletes through personalized strategies and support. With a deep understanding of the unique pressures faced by professional athletes, she is dedicated to helping them achieve peak mental fitness and overall well-being. Dr. Dez co-facilitates the rookie success and player development programs, which equips players with skills for navigating professional sports. She conducts draft evaluations and assists the front office with draft selection. Dr. Dez also regularly consults with the coaching staff on optimizing culture as well as enhancing coach wellness. So they have Dr. Dez, and you can read all kinds of things about her. I'd encourage you to do that. If that's something that's interesting to you, there's a lot that you can check into. Tim says this, it's been multiple weeks that I've been sitting on this thought, but is there juice missing from this team? By that, I mean hype on the sideline. It seems like every time I see the sideline, it's just quiet. Like there's nobody on the sideline hyping the team up. Josh isn't the kind of leader to go hype the team up on the sideline. So where does it come from? Especially when the game is going the wrong way. Josh just sits quietly by himself. Seems like a bunch of guys that are just showing up to work and have lost the fun of the game. Like something is missing here, and it's obvious to me. Curious your thoughts on this. So I've gotten a lot of questions like this, and I have a hard time answering it. First of all, when we see shots of the sideline during games, I mean, we only see what they show us. And so I truly feel uncomfortable commenting since we only see like a fraction of what's actually going on. So I don't know. Is it interesting to consider, like, do they have a lack of those type of alpha rah-rah personalities? Like maybe that's true. Josh is the thermostat of this team. I think that's very intentional. But I think you can look at last year, a guy like Mac Hollins. Prior to that, a guy like Stephon Diggs, maybe Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, and think maybe that some of that's missing. I do think that the Bills have a lot of reserved players, guys that are quiet. James Cook, Khalil Shakir, Matt Milano, Taron Johnson. Like there's a lot of guys that don't say much, it feels like. But I don't know. I can't really speak with much confidence on this matter. But we only see what they show us. There's a lot going on. I think NFL football players, like if you need somebody on the sideline to hype you up and get you going, like you're probably doing the wrong thing for a living. If you can't get up for the stakes of professional football, not just for like teams, but what it means for you and your life and your career and the opportunity, you're in the wrong profession. So I kind of struggle to think that players need this type of thing, talking about high stakes professional football. I couldn't imagine like the lack of hype or rah-rah being a serious problem for any NFL team based on the stakes. So interesting talking point. I don't know the answer. I certainly don't feel like I can speak with confidence on it, but zooming out and just thinking about the NFL and what's at stake for everybody would lean me to think that there's not a lack of motivation to perform your best, if that makes sense. All right, folks, there you have it. Herd mentality in the books. We're going to spend the rest of the week getting ready for this Bucs game, a very interesting game, an important game, and we'll get ready for it. We'll have crossover Thursday. We'll do the full primer. We'll do my final thoughts and be ready for Sunday against the Bucs. So don't miss anything. Make sure you're subscribed. We'd love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills. And I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.